Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I hope everyone will join me in welcoming Joshua Bruckner, the Forest Pest Outreach Coordinator for the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. Joshua is here this evening to speak to us about invasive species in the state, and he will be taking questions. So if you do have any, please feel free to put them here in the Zoom chat or on our Facebook Live feed. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Joshua.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, Sharon, and thank you everyone for attending and for taking some time out of your busy schedules to learn a little bit about some of the invasive insects that we're dealing with in the state. We have a lot of different topics to cover, so we're gonna get right into it. And like Sharon said, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat or save them for later. I will try and leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So we're going to dive right into it with invasive insects in Massachusetts. To begin, we're gonna figure out what an invasive species is, because we're gonna be using that term a lot tonight. So quite simply, it is a non-native species in an ecosystem, something that was not originally from that area. And it typically is something that causes ecological harm in some way. It might be damaging to other plants or animals that are there, or other parts of the biome. Typically, they're introduced by humans, though not always. And often, native species do not have adaptations to successfully compete or overcome those invasive species. And the pictures we have here are of some famous invasive species. The cane toad, which was introduced to Australia as a way to control for a worm that was eating the sugarcane crops. The cane toad, however, eats basically everything but that worm, and it quickly overtook the continent. Kudzu is a plant found in the American South. Very, very quickly grows. It can outcompete a lot of other native plants and suffocates them, as you can see. The Asian longhorned beetle, which we will talk about very, very shortly, is a voracious pest of hardwood trees, and it's found a lot of good places to thrive here in Massachusetts. So what makes something a successful invasive species? You know, you can have a foreign or non-native species introduced, but it needs to be successful and actually be able to outcompete things. So typically some factors associated with a successful invasive species are a high reproductive rate, rapid growth rate. For something like an insect, where they usually, have a whole generation in 1 year, that obviously applies. Usually they have to be tolerant of a variety of growth conditions, or they need to be introduced into an area of the world that's similar to their native climate. With Asian longhorn beetle, this latitude in Massachusetts is pretty similar to their native range in China, so they're able to survive this climate. Lack of natural enemies definitely helps. If there's no predator, nothing that'll attack that introduced animal or plant, it's going to grow without any sort of impediments to its growth. Associations with humans means that there's a lot of ways for the invasive species to spread or be introduced. And introduction or association with humans means that there's typically a way for that animal to be introduced into an environment repeatedly over a lot of times in a lot of different ways. It's not just one introduction, it'll be several over many, many years. So we're going to get right into our first invasive species, the Asian longhorned beetle. So that's it right there. It's got the Latin names up there on the screen. If you are interested in that classification, it's called the Anoplophora glabripennis, which is Latin for smooth wings. A lot of scientific or Latin names are descriptive of what the animal or the species is like. So it is an invasive pest and a pest of hardwood trees. And its native range is East Asia, places like China, Korea, and Japan. Right here we have the two insects side by side, or the male and the female side by side, and you can see some of the characteristics of this insect. It's got a lot of pretty distinct physical characteristics that make it stand out. For one, it has a bluish tinge to its feet, which you're not going to see on a preserved sample. This is only really on the live ones. They're a pretty big insect, about 3/4 to 1.5 inches long. They have a very, very shiny black body, as you can see here. It's kind of like a patent leather shoe almost. They have those bright white splotches or speckles or spots all over their body in this kind of random pattern. You can see right here the female and the male look different. They have those very long white banded antennae kind of those distinct stripes. And you'll notice on the female on the left, her antennae are about as long as her body. The male's antennae are longer than the body, but the males tend to be a little bit smaller. And to give you an idea of what this insect looks like in real life, I have one right here, preserved, of course, but you can see it right there. That is the Asian longhorn beetle. You can see it looks like the picture. You can't really see the spots right here, but you can see it's got the long antennae. This is a female. It's got the shiny black body. And compared to my hands, you can see about how big it is. It's, you know, about the size of part of my thumb, so pretty big insect. Right here, we've got the life cycle of the Asian longhorn beetle. And this is going to, this is a pretty typical life cycle for a wood-boring insect. You see, starting on the bottom left here, we've got the adult beetle, which is going to lay its eggs on the outside of the tree. The adult active, you know, outside the tree. It's going to feed on the leaves of the tree. The egg, once it's hatched, hatches into a larva, this little like a white worm. The larva spends its life cycle inside the tree, and this is what does the damage to the tree. So while the adult eats leaves, the larva is going to eat the wood of the tree. So it goes through a couple different instars or stages. The larva will develop inside the tree, overwintering, you know, where the larva will hatch in the late summer or the fall, and then they'll hatch and spend that entire winter in the tree. It'll pupate eventually before developing into an adult, where it bores its way out of the tree to continue the life cycle. So right here, this little clip shows what the egg-laying process looks like. The male is guarding the female as she chews a pit into the tree. You can see little bits of bark come flying off towards the camera. She uses her very powerful mandibles to dig a pit into the tree, and she's going to lay one egg in each hole that in the tree. And that can be like between 50 and 100 eggs in her life, so pretty good number. From each egg hatches a larva, again, this little like white grub. And once they hatch, they bore their way into the bark, into the tree, past the what's called the cambium layer, which is the living tissue right underneath the bark, which helps transport water and nutrients, and into the heartwood of the tree, where they're going to create this gallery, eating away at the wood and feeding off of it. It's this boring through the cambium layer, through that tissue, that causes the tree to ultimately die, because it's going to be full of holes from the beetle chewing its, or the larva chewing its way in, and that's going to ultimately, you know, the tree's not going to be able to feed itself that way. The frass right here that's labeled in this picture, this long matchstick-like shaving, is the waste material of the larva. It's eating and digesting wood, so it's going to excrete wood as well, and it's like this very long, stringy-looking thing. Like some people said, it looks like spaghetti. That's a good characteristic sign of Asian longhorn beetle damage, is that would get pushed out of the egg site. So you'll see that like coming out of the tree and gathering like around the roots or in the branches, something like that. And I should mention, while inside the tree, obviously, the larvae, they're so deep inside, they're protected from both the cold of the winter and predators like woodpeckers. So once the larva pupates, it's going to, and the pupa emerges as an adult, it's going to bore its way out of the tree like this, creating a signature round exit hole, which is a good sign of damage from the beetle. Right here is the Asian longhorn beetle versus what's called a white-spotted pine sawyer. And this is a very common native species. The white-spotted pine sawyer is considered harmless. It's a native species. It's been in Massachusetts for a long time. But we have them here because they're both longhorn beetles. They look very similar. And very often people will find a white-spotted pine sawyer and report it thinking they found the Asian longhorn beetle. You'll notice the difference between the two. The pine sawyer has a very rough-looking texture to its wing cases. It doesn't, doesn't have quite as many spots on it, though sometimes it does have some. It's kind of a bronzish black or dark color instead of that shiny black. And most critically, it's got that white spot right there between the wing cases, right behind the head, on what's called the scutellum. That's that part of the wing case there. The Asian longhorn beetle is never going to have a white spot in that area, but white-spotted sawyer always will. And as the name implies, the pine sawyer goes after dead and dying pine trees, so it actually helps that process of breaking down dead material in the environment. So they're beneficial to the environment, and they are active earlier in the year, whereas Asian longhorn beetle emerges in July. Like mid-July, the pine sawyer starts to become active around Memorial Day. And you can see the two insects right here, Asian longhorn beetle versus the white-spotted pine sawyer. Got the Asian longhorn beetle right here. You can see it's a little bit larger. It's got those white spots, a little bit shiny. The white-spotted sawyer right here is a bit rougher and darker in texture. And I don't know if you can see that white spot there, but it will always have that white spot right there behind the wing cases. So if you're ever uncertain about what you're finding, that's what you want to look for. So Asian longhorn beetle, one of the things that makes it such a persistent pest is it has a very large variety of host trees, and it goes after only living trees, living hardwood specifically. Its favorite tree is maple, all species of maple. We find them most commonly on red maple, but it will also go after sugar maples, Norway maples, silver maples, box elders, striped maple, basically any kind of maple you could think of. But red maples are probably the most common. That's a pretty common tree that'll grow in forests around here. It's very often planted in parks or other public spaces, and Norway maples are a very, very common street tree that's planted here. That's also a non-native species, but it grows very quickly, so it's commonly used by cities planted alongside streets. Other common host trees are the horse chestnut, the elm, willow, all species or all varieties of willow, and birch, pretty much every kind of birch except the sweet birch or black birch. And then some other less common hosts are the sycamore or London plane tree, the mountain ash, varieties of ash tree, poplars and cottonwoods, and then three decorative or ornamental trees native to Asia, the mimosa, the katsura, and the golden rain tree. So again, it only goes after living trees or living hardwoods, and these are the ones that it goes after. These are the most typical signs of Asian longhorn beetle damage that people look for and that you can look for on the hardwood trees in your neighborhood. So there's the egg sites, shown there on the left. The fresher egg sites are kind of like this very light color or bright. They have these mandible marks on the outside. You can see from that's where the adult female is chewing the egg site, the pit. She leaves those marks behind. When they're older, those egg sites will heal up, kind of look like this darker pit with these marks on it. You can also look for frass. Again, that's the waste material from the larva getting pushed out of the tree, getting pushed out of the egg sites. It's gonna be that long, stringy looking sawdust stuff. It's not gonna be very fine powder like you might get with termite or a carpenter ant. It's gonna be very long and stringy like shavings. And then probably the easiest to identify and most distinct sign of damage is going to be these exit holes. Again, this is what the adult beetle leaves behind as it bores its way out of the tree. Once it is fully developed, it leaves behind these perfectly round, about pencil-sized holes. And if you actually take a pencil, a number 2 pencil, and put it into those holes, it's going to go straight in about 2 inches, and it's going to be perfectly level with the ground. It's not going to go in up at an angle or go down at all. It will be perfectly level. And this is probably one of the best indicators of Asian longhorn beetle damage. If you find this on a hardwood tree, it's a good sign of Asian longhorn beetle damage. And I have one right here so you can see for yourself. You can see this is taken from a red maple, I believe. You can see all of the holes, those perfectly round holes that are left behind by the Asian longhorn beetle. And if I take a pencil, put it in, it's going to go in about straight like that. Turning this piece of wood over, you can see the galleries left behind by the larvae. This is them. They're chewing these larvae, these galleries in the inside the tree, and then as they bore their way out, you get those exit holes. So this is a pretty rough-looking tree, but this is what you'd want to look for when you're looking for damage. Right here, you can see a photo where you can see what it looks like as well. You can see the difference between the egg sites and the exit holes right here. The egg sites are right here. The exit holes are throughout this maple. And with the tree cut away, you can see the galleries inside the tree and some staining as well. So this is the tree from probably earlier on in the infestation, when the trees were much, much, much more heavily damaged. But this gives you a good idea of what you would want to look for and what inspectors look for when they're surveying for damage. So now that we know a bit about the life cycle and what the beetle does, what its damage looks like. Next question is how it got here, because it comes from the other side of the world. And a lot of these invasive species do not kind of get to new areas on their own power. We have a global economy with a lot of interconnected countries and trade, so that is kind of the main way a lot of invasive species will spread, and that is the case with the Asian longhorn beetle. So the larva most likely got to the US in around 1998 or even earlier, and the larva would have been in these solid wood packing materials or pallets. Trees that were infested with the larva would have been cut down and turned into packages in China to ship materials over here to the US. They were not treated, so the larvae survived and were able to emerge as adults by the time they got here. So legislation was passed in 1998 that requires these solid wood packing materials to be treated with heat or chemicals to kill any larvae that might be developing inside them. But obviously that was too late for the Asian longhorn beetle. It was already established by the time it got here. So on its own, the Asian longhorn beetle is not a great flyer, as you can maybe tell from taking a look at it. It's a pretty big insect. It takes a lot of energy for that thing to fly, so it's not going to travel much by flying on its own. It prefers to spend many generations on the same tree before they'll travel to another tree to lay their eggs, or they'll go from the interconnected branches of one tree to another. In the case of these very large street trees or shade trees with like overlocking branches. So human activity is kind of the main way they can move around, and a lot of that could be unintentional. It could be firewood from an infested tree getting moved around. It could be the adults hitchhiking a ride on a car or some other vehicle or in a shipping container. It could be nursery stock, like a young maple tree sold in a nursery that has the larva inside it that gets moved around. Firewood is kind of the main way that these beetles can move around. So imagine you have an infested tree. The tree has Asian longhorn beetle larvae developing inside it. Gets knocked over in a storm. You cut that tree up into logs, sell it as firewood, or you bring it to a campsite somewhere, and you're going to be moving that insect around much further and faster than it would be able to under its own power. So there is a national Don't Mow Firewood campaign. You can see it at don'tmowfirewood.org to raise awareness about this, so we can prevent the spread of these invasive insects and make sure the beetle doesn't move around. So how do we remove Asian longhorn beetle? It takes about 8 to 10 years for them to kill a healthy tree, again, by the larva eating the cambium layer and girdling the tree like that. And the most cost-effective way of determining to stop Asian longhorn beetles is to cut down those infested trees. Straight up cut them down, wood chip them, and the wood chipping process kills the larva. There are chemical treatments, like an injection that will inoculate the tree, but that is expensive and it is more of a preventative measure. So in something like the infestation in Worcester, that's not really going to be effective. So in this case, we use cutting and removing trees, as it looks like right here. So this is Granville Ave in Worcester, which is very near the site of the first found Asian longhorn beetle, or the first infested tree. And you can see the difference between the before and the after of all these these were probably Norway maples or some other kind of maple that were on these streets that were all cut down. That has a pretty big impact on the neighborhood, both in terms, like the characteristic of the neighborhood, the way it feels. Losing all those trees means you're gonna lose a noise barrier, a barrier for wind. You lose all that shade. Heating costs and cooling costs are probably going to go up for these houses. There's been studies that show that property value declines when these neighborhoods lose all their trees like that. And a lot of residents of these neighborhoods were initially resilient to the eradication program because they did not want to lose all of their nice trees on their property and on their street. But I kind of realized ultimately that why it was being done, it was for the greater good and why it was beneficial. But it does show you kind of the huge impact that the beetle can have on these areas. Right here on the screen right now, you can see what's called the regulated area in Worcester. This is the area where surveyors have determined the Asian longhorn beetle is in Massachusetts. So the beetle was first discovered in Worcester in 2008, and it had been there for at least 10 years. And through rigorous survey of trees and inspecting things, we have ended up with this 110 square mile regulated area that encompasses the towns of Worcester, Shrewsbury, Boylston, West Boylston, part of Holden, and the small part of Auburn. The last time this map was expanded was in late 2011, and at this point, surveyors are very confident that all the remaining infested trees and Asian longhorn beetle are within this regulated area. So over 5 million trees have been surveyed in the regulated area, and we see fewer and fewer infested trees removed per year, with 22 trees removed in 2019. And they have found one damaged tree in Auburn in February this year. That's the first tree they found in Auburn, and it kind of gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. And obviously, I should say as well, part of the regulated area is making sure people don't move firewood or other woody materials like trees or whatever outside of it, because that could risk spreading the beetle. So things like firewood can come into that regulated area, but they cannot leave it. For comparison, we have there was an Asian longhorn beetle infestation in Boston, but the regulated area was much smaller. It was only 10 square miles, and it was declared eradicated in 2014 after only about 4 years of survey, and that's because they caught the infestation very early on. They actually got the beetles as they were emerging from the trees. They were in a parking lot of a hospital, and it was a high priority task because they were very close to the Arnold Arboretum. But since they caught it so early and they did such a rigorous job of surveying, they were able to determine that they were able to eradicate it in about 4 years. So it kind of goes to show you the importance of catching these invasive species and populations very early, and just kind of keeping your eye out for them. This right here shows a map of the different infestations in the United States, as well as the yellow shows the different hardwood forests that exist in the Northeast. So you can see a couple different infestations of Asian longhorn beetle that we've dealt with historically. There's one in Chicago that was declared eradicated in 2008. There's one in Toronto that was declared eradicated. New Jersey and New York, the one in Brooklyn was just declared eradicated last year. Obviously, we're dealing with the one in Worcester. There's one in Ohio that's being dealt with. There's one on Long Island that's being dealt with. And you can see why it's such a high priority thing, the one we have in Massachusetts, because Worcester sits right at the bottom of this massive hardwood forest that goes up into northern New York, into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And left to spread on its own, the Asian longhorn beetle could be devastating to all these forests, to all these trees, a lot of national parks, and other stretches of beautiful land and wildlife. So it's the kind of thing we want to make sure is quarantined and eradicated. And I have this here because they just found Asian longhorn beetle last week in South Carolina. So right now they are still determining the extent of that infestation. It is very close to Charleston. Sorry, not Charleston. It's in Hollywood, South Carolina, which is near, I guess. Yeah, it is Charleston. Sorry. So that was found by a resident who found an unknown beetle, didn't know what it was, talked to her son, who told her to report it to the authorities and the experts, which he did, and they figured out it was Asian longhorn beetle. So Syndex is, still can spread, even though we have done a pretty good job of quarantining it in the Worcester area. Don't know how that one got there in South Carolina or where it came from. They are still working on that. Briefly, I'm going to show you what the eradication and survey process looks like. I've mentioned the words eradication program, survey. This is what it looks like. In Worcester, we have a cooperative eradication program formed up of surveyors, a ground crew with people from DCR, from USDA, from some private contractors. They go around that regulated area, the 110 square mile area, and they search every host tree, every maple, every elm, every birch, every ash, every willow, and so on, for signs of damage. They use binoculars and scopes to look for the exit holes, the egg sites, and they have a GIS program so they can map every single host tree and every single damaged tree that they find so they can keep track of it. And sometimes they have people who can climb the trees to take a look at damage. Maybe someone saw something in a tree that's 50 feet off the ground, but they can't tell what it is. So they'll have the climbers go and check it out and figure out what it is. They also use traps to determine kind of the range of the insect. They take these big black plastic traps with a pheromone inside of them, a lure that lures the insects there. The insects, when you have being bad flyers, they'll kind of like drown in that little cup of water at the bottom when they hit the side of the trap. The traps get moved around to new locations every year, so they're constantly moving them to see if they can find new areas where the beetle has moved or if they've missed them. But they have not found a live beetle in any traps since 2015. So this, combined with the fact that we're finding fewer infested trees every year, tells us that the population has been on the decline. So ultimately, once the survey crew, once they have found an infested tree, it has to get removed and then wood chipped. Over 36,000 trees have been removed from the regulated area since we started the eradication program in 2008. And there is a wood chipping lot in the regulated area where the trees are ground up like that. And they're pretty fine looking wood chips like right here. And once a tree or a log is moved through a wood chipper twice, it's going to kill the larva pretty effectively. They can't survive in a pile of wood chips. They have to be in a tree, and then those wood chips can be, they're considered deregulated, so they're safe to sell or move outside the regulated area or used for like mulch or wood chips or any other projects, but they can be sold and reused. And then there's a replanting program where non-host trees such as cherry or pines or oak trees are replanted to replace the trees that get cut down. Right now, that is spearheaded by the nonprofit group, the Worcester Tree Initiative, and earlier on the infestation, DCR and the city of Worcester were also involved in that as well. So again, if you have, we're going to move on to the next insect, the emerald ash borer, but if you have questions about Asian longhorn beetle, you can type them into the chat or save them for the end, and I will address them. So the emerald ash borer, you can see right here, it already is a pretty different looking insect. Its Latin name is at the top there, Agrillus planipennis. Once again, like Asian longhorn beetle, it is a wood-boring insect and was thought to have been introduced sometime in the 90s to the United States through solid wood packing material. It was first discovered in 2002 in Michigan and in Ontario, Canada. And this is considered a highly destructive pest of ash and has been responsible for the death of tens of millions of trees in southeastern Michigan alone. So you'll see the scope and extent of this insect versus Asian longhorn beetle. It's quite different. Like Asian longhorn beetle, this insect is native to East Asia, like China, parts of Korea and Japan, and Russia in this case. It goes after ash trees, as the name implies, pretty much any ash species, white ash, black ash, green ash. Might very infrequently go after fringe trees or olive trees, but we are going to focus on ash trees because that's what we find them on the vast majority of the time. Its life cycle here kind of resembles that of the Asian longhorn beetle, the wood-boring insect. Once again, you have the eggs being laid on the outside of the tree. The larvae, when they hatch, bore their way inside the tree. They're feeding on in this case, the emerald ash borer does not go into the heartwood of the tree. They're staying right underneath the bark in the cambium layer, but they're chewing away at that living tissue. They're eating the wood, and they're gonna disrupt the tree's ability to feed itself. They'll pupate there in the safety of the tree, eventually emerge as an adult, and fly around and lay more eggs. And the adults will eat leaves, but again, the larva is what's doing damage. So you can see what they look like here. These kind of like, they're described as like having bell-shaped segments, this little white worm. They feed on the cambium layer, so they're right underneath the bark, and because they're chewing so rapidly away at the cambium layer that's feeding the tree, it's transporting water and nutrients from the roots up the trunk to the branches. That's going to what's called like girdle the trees. It's going to like kill it very, very quickly. It can be as little as 1 to 2 years on smaller ash trees. You can see what it looks like here. You've got the adult beetle, you've got the larva right there. And I'll bring this back in a moment, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what it looks like in real life. Tree damage looks like this. So you've got these S-shaped galleries right underneath the bark. You can see the bark's right here, was stripped away. And in the cambium layer, you've got these tunnels left behind by the by the larvae as they're eating away. The frass, the waste materials, going to be inside those galleries. And the adults leave behind these D-shaped exit holes right here, kind of like a half moon or a D, very, very small, that they leave behind as they bore their way out of the tree once they're fully developed. You can see right, I've got a picture of it right there in the S-shaped gallery next to the larva. Might be a little hard to see, but it's kind of that white worm there. You also might see these other signs of general ash health decline, what's called epicormic sprouting and blonding. The blonding right here, this is a very distinct sign. So this is from woodpecker damage. The woodpeckers, they can tell that there's larvae right underneath the bark of the tree, and they're going to start pecking away at the tree. They're going to strip away the outer layer of bark, which leaves this like raggedy yellowish appearance. You can see the rough holes left behind by the woodpecker, big rough looking holes. You're also going to see what's called epicormic shooting, possibly. As an ash tree is in general declining health and it's stressed out, it's going to put out these young green shoots directly from the trunk to help absorb more sunlight and energy, and that's, again, a sign of general ash stress. So either of these signs on their own, maybe not necessarily from emerald ash borer, but the blonding is usually a pretty good indicator that you're dealing with emerald ash borer. As you notice from the Riker mount I had right here, this is a much smaller insect than the Asian longhorn beetle. I'll hold my thumb up to the insect as well, and you can see how much smaller it is. So it's about a ½ inch long. It's got that brilliant, shimmering emerald green look to it, kind of a blunt looking head, and they have a coppery or purple body underneath that wing casing, which you'll see when they spread their wings to fly. But since it's a small insect, it's pretty fast. It's a pretty good flyer, so you might not see the adult. You might just see the damage on the tree. Right here we have a map of Massachusetts, which shows you the extent of the damage, or kind of how far throughout the state the emerald ash borer has spread. It was first confirmed in Massachusetts in 2012 in Berkshire County, so out west where we have a lot more native ash. And in the 8 years since then, it has spread to almost every county in Massachusetts and is in over 110 cities and towns at this point, including much of the Berkshires, Hamden, Hampshire, and Franklin County. It's in Worcester and some parts of Middlesex County up here in the north, and Boston as well, Suffolk County. So this insect spreads very quickly, and it's very possible that towns that are near the infested towns, like this one right here, things that are around here in Hampshire and Berkshire County, where we haven't found emerald ash borer, confirmed it yet, but because it spreads so quickly and can fly up to about 2 miles to find a new host tree, it's very possible it's in those places yet, and we haven't found it. This is how far emerald ash borer is spread nationwide, and I have to update this map very frequently because it spreads so fast. Remember, it was first found in southeast Michigan in 2002, and now in 2020, it is in 35 states and 5 Canadian provinces. It's in, much of the Midwest from around where it was first discovered, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, in New York, and all of New England at this point. It's as far south as Georgia, and as far out west as parts of Texas and Colorado. And this spread is, attributed not just to the insect being a very good flyer, but to human activity. Certainly early on, before it was discovered in Michigan, you would have had infested wood and nursery stock being moved all over the place. So again, this is a very mobile insect, very disruptive. A couple things are being done to deal with the emerald ash borer. Insecticides and pesticides are used to inoculate trees and protect them. Again, like with Asian longhorn beetle, this is kind of a preventative measure. You can't use pesticides to inoculate an entire forest, but if there's an ash tree on your property or in the town, a couple that are of particular value, you might want to preserve those. Some ash trees are girdled, parts of the bark will be stripped away to serve as a population sink. A lot of the beetles will be attracted to that stressed out tree with the exposed cambium layer. You can cut that tree down and wood chip it to get rid of the larva that it lays inside. A lot of biocontrol is being researched right now. That would be another animal, in this case some parasitic wasps that are being researched to see if they can be used to control the emerald ash borers. A couple different wasps that are being researched, some that have been released into the wild, and there have been some good promising results right here. I don't know if any of those wasps have common names. The names are usually presented in the Latin, but you can look up what those are. And again, education and outreach are always a big part of dealing with invasive insects, making sure people like you, like the general public, are aware of these insects, know what the damage looks like, know how to find the insect, and then how to report them. So management of emerald ash borer usually looks like management of a town's ash stock, making sure, checking the health of your ash trees, seeing if an ash tree in poor health is dying because of emerald ash borer. But there's no, unlike with Asian longhorn beetle, there's no efforts to quarantine the beetle because this has spread so quickly and so far and done so much damage. So management really comes down to individuals and to towns. So there's a lot of management plans that are being made by tree wardens, by towns, by DCR, being proactive to decide which ash trees they want to save, which ones they want to inoculate, which ones they maybe want to get rid of and replace with a non-host tree that is going to be resilient. So a couple different things that you as individuals can do, but there's no eradication program like with Asian longhorn beetles. So some a different management strategy. And again, don't want to move firewood with this insect because it's a wood-boring insect. The larvae can be moved. There are traps that are put up, like with Asian longhorn beetle, either these purple sticky traps where the beetle gets stuck to them, or these green funnel traps where they fall down and get stuck in these little cups at the bottom. Those traps get hung on ash trees, and they're attracting as many insects as possible to try and stop the population from spreading. Last insect of the night, spotted lanternfly. This one is a little bit different. A couple reasons. One, it is not in Massachusetts just yet. It is not established. So that means unlike Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer, rather than talk about management and eradication, we can talk about preventing it from getting here. It is also not a wood-boring insect. It is a sapsucker. It goes after a lot of different plants, including things like tree of heaven, grapes, and apples. It's from a pretty similar part of the world, East Asia, China, and you can see what it looks like right here. Pretty striking looking insect, at least as presented here with the wings spread. You can see what it looks like right here. It's got those nice spread wings. Kind of looks like a butterfly, but it's not. It is what's called a true bug. Its classification is Lycorma delicatula. True bug means it has a piercing or sucking mouth part or proboscis. It is closely related to things like stink bugs and aphids, so it uses those proboscises to puncture a hole in a plant and suck the sap out of them. You can see what it looks like here with those wings folded. Kind of actually pretty well camouflaged against the rough bark of a tree right here. You can't really see when the wings are full like that. You can't see that brilliant red underwing. It's going to be this mottled gray surface. So that's what it looks like. These are some lookalikes. This guy from University, the Virginia Cooperative Extension. You'll see a couple different moths here, things like tiger moth, leopard moth, which we definitely have in Massachusetts. But that's what you want to look for, is those the red underwings, the yellow striped abdomen that you get on the gravid females. No antenna, so unlike a moth or butterfly, you won't have these long antennae, and the kind of gray mottled outer wing. Why is this a species of concern? What does it do to our trees? A whole lot. As I said, it is a sapsucker. It goes after the phloem of the tree, so it punctures a hole in the tree with its proboscis, feeds on that sweet, sticky sap, and it's going to produce what's called honeydew. It's very sticky waste substance because it can't consume all the sugars that it ingests. So it's going to excrete a lot of that as a sticky honeydew waste substance. That's going to attract things like bees and wasps and ants that'll feed on the tree. And more importantly, that honeydew will create a sooty mold that's going to grow all over the tree and the ground. You can see right here, this tree that is got sooty mold growing on it is the ring, the black stuff all over the ground, the stick, the rocks. That's the sooty mold. It's going to kill whatever plant it grows on. You got the lanternfly everywhere. Right here, this is a grape leaf that's got sooty mold and the honeydew on it. You can see it's on everything. It's pretty gross, and include not just plants. This is someone's back porch in Pennsylvania. And you can see it's covered in that sticky substance. That's not water, that's the honeydew. And that could get on anything. Back porch, steps, your car, lawn furniture, camping equipment. Pretty much anything that gets left out, if it's underneath the tree with the spotted lanternfly, could get covered in the honeydew. It also has a tendency to swarm. It's not going to just be a few of them, as you saw in those previous photos. When it's bad, there's a lot of them. This video is from Pennsylvania, so you can see what it looks like. So yeah, when it gets bad, you know, they're all over the tree. You can't even see the bark. It's kind of what we want to avoid here in Massachusetts. Moving right along, so its main host is the tree of heaven, AILANTHUS ALTISSIMA. You might also know it as just AILANTHUS. You might have seen them. You know, it's very possible that you have them in your neighborhood or your town. It is also a non-native tree. It is invasive. It was introduced to the U.S. in the late 1700s. It was introduced on purpose, though, because it was considered this beautiful exotic tree. It's very hardy. It can grow in a lot of spaces. It was planted in a lot of burgeoning cities and urban areas in the United States, like New York. It's now considered a pest just because it's so hard to get rid of. It's got a very distinct, gross smell to it when you crush the leaves, kind of like rancid peanut butter. And it produces a toxin that suppresses the growth of other trees, so very persistent. But it can be identified by this kind of mottled gray, kind of like cantaloupe skin bark. It gets these orangey yellow flowers and samaras. That's the seed. They kind of look like the seeds of an ash tree. Kind of these fruits like that, or these papery looking fruits that are shaped like a canoe paddle that'll hang on in the winter, and it gets these big feather-shaped fronds of leaves, what are called compound leaves. Each of those big things right here, this is actually one leaf right here, and each of those little leaflets is part of the leaf. So big compound leaves, pretty distinct looking. And although tree of heaven is its main host, evidence suggests that it might need it to complete its life cycle. We're not sure yet. It goes after a lot of other plants as well. A lot of things that we care about as humans, things like apples, plums, peaches, cherries, anything in the prune family, grapes. It really is a huge pest of grapevines, maple trees, black walnuts, and things like birches, pines, American beeches, aspens, sycamores, willows, elms, pears, blueberries, roses. Total of about 70 different species. So it's a huge pest. It's a generalist. Anything that has sap, it will go after. And rose is actually a pretty good indicator of the nymph, the young form, which we'll go over very shortly. So you can see what it looks like here as it's swarming these different host trees. And you'll notice it's not going after the fruit itself. It's not attacking the grapes or the apples. It's attacking the tree. But it can get sooty mold, or it can get honeydew on those fruits. Sooty mold will grow on them. It'll render them unsellable, pretty disgusting. And ultimately, sucking the sap out of the trees like this could ultimately kill them. A lot of farmers in Pennsylvania have lost a lot of plants at their vineyards, a lot of grapevines because of the spotted lanternfly. Huge loss of business. And obviously, things like apples, grapes, hops, being pests of spotted lanternfly, or being hosts of spotted lanternfly. These are all things we make alcohol out of. So this insect, the spotted lanternfly, is not just going to have an impact on the aesthetic beauty of our towns and our neighborhoods. That tree being covered in spotted lanternfly. It's going to affect our agricultural industry, alcohol production industry, things like the hardwood and the lumber and the timber industry. So this can have a huge economic impact as well as just the environmental impact. Quick look at the life cycle, and I'm going to hold up the Riker mount right here so you can see what it looks like in real life. So you'll notice, unlike the Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer, this insect goes through what's called incomplete metamorphosis. Instead of having a caterpillar or a larva and then a pupa and an adult stage, it has what are called nymphs right here, and then the adult. So from the egg will hatch, the nymph goes through 4 different stages or instars. The last instar goes from being black with white spots to very bright red. Those are active, in the summer and spring. The adult develops and emerges in about July. They're active through the first hard frost, where they'll lay their eggs. The eggs survive over the winter, and then they will hatch in the spring. So the egg masses, they're very, very well camouflaged, as you can see here. Looks kind of like, gray mud or something. The female will cover the egg masses, which are these little connected little bumps right here with that substance, which protects them, and it makes them camouflage. You can see in this picture here, this one here, how well that gray covering can be camouflaged against the bark of a tree or a rock. Each egg mass has about 30 to 50 eggs, and the female lays up to about 2 egg masses a year, so she can lay up to 100 eggs in one lifetime. And there's only one generation a year. Like I said, the adults die off in the winter, but the eggs survive. And the nymphs will also do damage to plants. So like I said earlier, rose is a good indicator of spotted lanternfly. That's because it's a very tender, soft, succulent plant, very easy for the nymphs with their smaller proboscises to pierce and suck the sap out of. The nymphs will also go after the softer part of the plants, the leaves and the stems. They'll go higher up the tree to get to those leaves, so they can do damage that way. A couple different ways the insect can spread. The egg masses are definitely a huge way, because the spotted lanternfly will lay its eggs not just on the trees that it feeds off of, it will lay them on basically any flat surfaces. We have found those egg masses on things like lawn furniture, on light bulbs, on people's cars, on camping equipment. So you can imagine those eggs getting laid on, firewood or packing material, or the side of a car or a railroad train, delivery car. A lot of different ways that those eggs can be spread around. The adults and the nymphs can also hitchhike onto vehicles, as you see right here. The pathways of tree of heaven, it grows readily in disturbed areas like the sides of roads or train tracks. If you have a bunch of tree of heaven growing along those roads and rails, a lot of ways for it to spread around. This right here, I'm going to try and wrap up fairly soon, so there's time for questions at the end. But this right here shows the regulated area of the quarantines in Pennsylvania, where it was first found. There's 26 counties right now. It was originally found in Berks County, Pennsylvania, so very close to Philadelphia, around here. That was in 2014, and it has since spread to all these different parts of the state. These are all the places nationally where we have found spotted lanternfly. You'll notice the blue areas are the quarantines. Those are in Pennsylvania, 8 counties in New Jersey, as well as Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia. And the purple dots on the screen show all the places where it has been found, but it is not established. So that includes North Carolina, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. There was one dead adult found in Boston in late 2018 in a potted plant, a poinsettia that was sent up from the quarantine in Pennsylvania from a garden center or a greenhouse up to a garden center or a store in Boston. The adult was already dead at the time by the time it got here, but it shows us that the spotted lanternfly can get here, and it is possible for it to be established. These are all the parts in the United States where, that are viable for spotted lanternfly, where the conditions are right for it to grow. You'll notice it includes, the Midwest, New Jersey, Massachusetts, part of California as well, and it's actually been found in California. Adults were dead at the time, but it can get to California through shipping, through planes, that sort of thing. There's a couple different management strategies when it comes to spotted lanternfly. So the photos right here show egg scraping. Scrape the eggs off of the tree, put them in a bottle of rubbing alcohol, or stomp them to get rid of them. Some other methods are things like tree banding, host removal, trap trees, biocontrols. Again, like with emerald ash borer, there's research being done into an insect like a parasitic wasp that will only go after the spotted lanternfly, so that can be a chemical-free way to control it. Post removal, very simply cutting down tree of heaven, prevent it from spreading. The tree banding right here is like a sticky tape that gets put around the tree. The nymphs get stuck to it since they can't fly. They're crawling up the tree to get to the softer leaves up top. They're going to get stuck in the trees like that. Problem is, you have to replace that sticky tape a lot when there's a very heavy infestation. And because it's sticky tape, some bigger animals like birds might get stuck to it. So sometimes chicken wire, or a guard is employed to protect the trap. Trap trees are when most tree of heaven are removed from an area. The remaining ones are treated with a pesticide. So if the spotted lanternfly are going to swarm those remaining tree of heavens, feed off the tree and ingest the pesticide and die off. This photo here shows it's a pretty effective control method. You can see all the dead spotted lanternfly around that tree of heaven, which was treated with that chemical pesticide to stop them from spreading. As with all of our other invasive insects, training and awareness is a huge part of it. So businesses that do work in the quarantined area in Pennsylvania is, someone that works with plants, maybe a garden center, a lawn care company, or businesses that are driving things all around, have to undergo training to make sure they're aware of the risks and know how to check for lanternfly and report them. Making sure people are aware of them so they're not moving them around if they come to the quarantined area. So I just kind of gave you a lot of information about these different insects, and you might be wondering, what can I do? Well, the first thing is obviously, what they look like, what the damage looks like, what the insect looks like. If you find anything, you can go to either this phone number right here or this website right here and tell us what you find. A lot of the insects we find, including that one Asian longhorn beetle in South Carolina, are found not by professionals, but by ordinary people, by residents who find a funny looking insect or some damage on a tree, and they let us know about it. So that's where you'd want to go. And I can share this information with Sharon and the library. So everyone has a ready access to those links if they need them. You want to make sure you're checking your tree for signs of damage, for any suspicious insects, for any funny looking damage. Know what those post trees are. Know how to identify a maple tree so you can check them for Asian longhorn beetle. Know how to identify a tree of heaven so you can check for the adults or the egg masses. Make sure you're not moving firewood. Again, that's a huge way those insects can be moved around. So that's the end of the presentation. So I want to say thank you, everyone. My contact information is right there, and I'm going to leave that up so you can write it down if you need it. But I'm going to open the floor to questions now. So you can unmute yourself if you have questions, and I will answer them as best I can. And I think some questions were put into the chat, so I guess I will start with those. One moment. All right, so if you spotted an invasive species, what should you do? So as I said, you would want to go to those links. So either the phone number right here, which is our pest hotline, or our website, massnrc.org/pests. We have reporting forms there where you can upload pictures that you take. So that's definitely the most effective thing you can do. If you find a suspicious looking insect or damage, take out your phone, take a picture, upload them on our website. They come right to us at the Department of Agricultural Resources, and we'll help you identify them. How do these invasive species get here is another question. So like I said, the fact that we have a global economy with a lot of interconnected shipping from different parts of the world is kind of the main way these spread. And most of it's by accident. You've got these little insects that are either inside the packing crates, their eggs are laid on the side of something, and maybe someone doesn't do a thorough job checking for damage. So that's kind of how the insects would spread around. There's a lot of species and insects native to the United States that have gotten to other parts of the world because of the interconnected nature of our economy. So oftentimes it's as simple as that. Just these insects hitch a ride with things. I'm sure everyone heard about the or remembers last month when everyone was talking about the Asian giant hornet and how it got here and was like this crazy dangerous thing. And it's like, well, that also got here accidentally. The insects were probably hiding or nesting inside some potted plants like a bonsai or some other container that had been sent from Asia to to Canada, the United States, and again, to sort of soothe any fears. There's no established population of Asian giant hornets that we know of in the United States. There was one in Canada, and that is, I think, is under control, or they found them there. It's not that big a deal right now. So those are all the questions that were in the chat. Does anyone have any others that they want to type in or relay on Facebook Live or speak into your microphone? All right. So if you have questions that you think of later, maybe over dinner or tomorrow or whatever, you can email me or call me. My phone number and my email address are both right up there on the screen. I will also share those with Sharon. So you can get in touch with me if you need it. And we just had a question in the chat. What is the most dangerous one? So I assume you mean dangerous to humans. And so the three insects that we talked about here, the Asian longhorn beetle, the emerald ash borer, and the spotted lanternfly, are not directly dangerous to humans. The Asian longhorn beetle is pretty big. Let me show you it again right here. But it's not going to attack humans. It's not going to try and chase after us and attack us. But if you pick it up and you bother it, it might give you a nice little pinch with its pincers, but it's just going to hurt a little. It won't harm you. It's not going to attack your house. The spotted lanternfly is, could definitely go after some plants you have in your garden. It's going to be kind of gross, with the honeydew getting everywhere. You might find a whole bunch in your trees. I'd say that's dangerous is the right word I'd use, but if you have a huge infestation of spotted lanternfly and it's all over your home or the trees in your yard or your garden, it's pretty disgusting, and it could have a huge impact on your just general day-to-day happiness, and again on the economy, on the fruits that we buy and the other things that we like. So with a bad infestation of lanternfly, you might see a huge impact, but I don't know if I'd say dangerous. But that's maybe the one that we'd want to worry about the most, especially if it got established here in Massachusetts and there's a lot of them. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, I think that's it for now.
I think so. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I think we're going to let you go for tonight, Joshua. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us this presentation, and thank you to everyone who's joined us on Facebook and in Zoom. If you are participating in our summer reading program, the adult summer reading program includes a raffle ticket for this program. The kids, you should be reading anyway. Excellent, excellent. We love to hear that. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thanks for joining me, people.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.